Your empath abilities were never meant to drain you, and Carl Jung spent decades quietly proving it. But the three things he said empaths must pay attention to were so uncomfortable that even his own students did not want to hear them. That is why you are tired. Not because you feel too much, not because the world is too heavy, but because nobody ever told you the actual truth about what is happening inside you. Every time you walk into a room full of people and come home 2 hours later feeling like something has been taken from you. You clicked on this video because that feeling is real and you are done pretending it is not. Good. Because what we are getting into today is not soft advice. It is not set boundaries and take baths. Carl Jung discovered about the deeply feeling mind is one of the most fascinating and, honestly, one of the most disturbing things in all of psychology, and it is going to change the way you see yourself by the time we are done. Here is the part that nobody is talking about. Jung did not think empaths were spiritually gifted. He did not think they were broken either. He thought they were stuck in a very specific psychological trap, one that most people never escape, and one that has a very specific name, a very specific cause, and here is the part that matters, a very real solution. 3 of them, actually. 3 things he said you must pay attention to if you ever want your empathy to feel like a gift instead of a punishment. But before we get there, let me ask you something. What if the exhaustion you feel is not coming from the people around you at all? What if it is coming from something inside you that you have never been introduced to? What if the reason you absorb everyone else's emotions so completely is not because you are sensitive, but because a part of your own inner world has been left completely in the dark? Jung had a word for that dark part. And when you find out what it is and what it has been doing to you, it is going to be one of those moments you remember. So let us go there. Let us start where Jung started, because his answer begins in a place that most people do not even know exists. Carl Jung believed that the human mind is not just yours. That sounds strange, so let me say it again in a way that makes more sense. Jung believed that underneath your personal memories, underneath your individual thoughts and fears and desires, there is a much older and much bigger layer of the mind that every single person on Earth shares. He called it the collective unconscious, not a metaphor, not a poetic idea. He meant it as a real, working part of the psychological structure of every human being alive. It is the layer where inherited symbols live, where ancient fears are stored, where the patterns of human experience going back thousands and thousands of years are encoded and waiting. This is not about childhood wounds or personal trauma, though those matter too. This is about something much older. Jung was talking about the layer of the mind that connects you to every human who has ever lived. The fears in all of us before anything has happened to justify them. The images that appear in dreams of people across cultures who share no language. The mythological themes that repeat across every civilization in every era, because they are not invented. They are inherited. Jung wrote that the collective unconscious comprises the psychic life of our ancestors right back to the earliest beginnings. He described it as the matrix, the starting point of all conscious psychological events. And he believed that every person carries this layer, whether they know it or not. Most people never feel it directly. They experience it in their dreams, in the stories that make them cry without knowing why, in the fears that do not match their personal history. But empaths feel it constantly. Empaths, according to Jung, have what he called a porous boundary between their personal conscious mind and this deeper collective layer. That porousness is why you feel so much. It is also why you feel so drained. Because here is the problem. That collective layer is not just yours. It belongs to everyone. And when you have no strong wall between your conscious mind and that shared layer, You do not just feel your own emotions, you feel a version of everyone else's too. You pick up emotional frequencies that other people are not even consciously sending. You tune into fears, griefs, angers, and longings that are not yours, and you carry them home like borrowed weight you cannot find a way to put down. Jung had a name for this experience too. He called it Participation Mystique, a term originally coined by the French anthropologist Lucien Lévy-Bruhl to describe how tribal, pre-modern peoples existed in a state of total psychological union with their environment and each other. Jung took that anthropological observation and applied it directly to the modern mind, and that application is the key. Because what Lévy-Bruhl was describing was a feature of the primitive, undeveloped psyche, one that had not yet individuated, not yet separated I from we. Jung was saying that when a modern empath merges with the emotional field of a room, they are not exhibiting a spiritual gift. They are sliding back into an ancient, atavistic psychological mode, a mode the human psyche was meant to grow beyond. That is not a comfortable truth, but it is a clarifying one. Participation Mystique describes a state of psychological merging. It is the condition in which the boundary between yourself and another person becomes so thin that their emotional experience becomes literally indistinguishable from your own. Their pain feels like your pain. Their anxiety lands in your chest like it started there. Their unspoken sadness fills the room you are sharing, and you absorb it without permission, without warning, and without any way to trace where it came from or how to give it back. Jung observed that in ancient tribal cultures, this was completely normal. People lived in a shared emotional field. Their identities were not meant to be fully separate from the group. What the tribe felt, the individual felt. There was no sharp line between I and we, and this is exactly why empaths feel the way they do in group settings. You are not imagining the weight of a room. You are not being dramatic when you say you can feel the tension before anyone has spoken a word. What you are experiencing is a very real and very ancient form of human attunement. The problem is not that you feel it. The problem is that you never learned how to feel it while staying yourself. Nobody taught you how to be connected and differentiated at the same time. And that missing education is the root of everything we are talking about today. But here is where things get dark, and this is the part that matters for you. If you are a modern person living an individual life, carrying other people's emotions as though they were your own is not a spiritual superpower. It is a sign that your psyche has not yet fully formed its own separate identity. Jung called this an undifferentiated psyche. To understand what that means, think of it this way. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. A differentiated psyche is one where your psychological functions, your feeling, your thinking, your intuition, are your own. They operate from your center, and they answer to you. An undifferentiated psyche, by contrast, is one where those functions have not yet separated from the collective field. For an empath, the feeling function specifically is still fused with the environment. It does not know the difference between inside and outside. It cannot locate where you end and the room begins. And that is the root cause, the actual psychological mechanism of empathic burnout. Not the feeling itself, the merging of the feeling function with everything around it. Now let us look at the first of the 3 things Jung said you must pay attention to, because this is where the real controversy begins. The first thing is what Jung called the persona. Think of the persona as the mask you wear in public. The version of you that shows up at work, at social gatherings, at family dinners. The polite you, the capable you, the I am doing just fine you. Every healthy human being has a persona. Every healthy human being needs one. You cannot and should not be the same raw, unfiltered person at a job interview that you are when you are alone at midnight eating cereal and watching something you would never admit to watching. Social masks are part of being alive in a world full of other people. But here is what Jung identified, and here is why it is so dangerous, for empaths specifically. Jung described the persona as a functional complex, a psychological structure built specifically for the purpose of adapting to the social world. That is its job, and it does the job well. The problem is not the persona itself. The problem is when the ego identifies with the persona completely. When that happens, the ego loses its connection to the true self. The person stops experiencing themselves as someone who wears a mask for social situations. They start experiencing the mask as all they are. There is no longer a gap between the face and the costume. The ego and the persona fuse. And when that fusion is complete, the person has no stable ground to return to after the performance is over. They come home from a social situation and feel not just tired, but genuinely empty, because there was no real self at home, waiting for them. Consider a composite profile that reflects patterns observed consistently across clinical and personal accounts. Imagine a deeply empathic person, the kind every social group has, the one everyone calls when something is wrong. From the outside, they have it together. Warm, attentive, emotionally available in a way that seems supernatural. But inside, they carry a constant low-grade confusion about who they actually are. They are so good at becoming what each situation requires that they genuinely cannot tell you, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, with nothing pressing, what they actually feel like. That confusion is not a personality quirk. It is what happens when the ego has identified with the persona for so long that the self underneath it has gone quiet. And every social interaction becomes a performance, scanning the room, reading the people, detecting what is needed, reshaping yourself to provide it. All of that costs energy you do not have an infinite supply of. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this pattern. It is the loneliness of being surrounded by people who love you and feeling completely alone anyway, because the person those people love is the persona, the version of you that reads the room and adjusts. And the real you, the one underneath all of that performance, has been standing in the back of your own life for so long that it has started to feel like a stranger even to you. Jung would say, that is not a relationship problem or a communication problem. That is a differentiation problem. You have fused so completely with the emotional world around you that you have lost the thread back to yourself. And every day you continue to operate entirely from the persona without checking in on the self underneath it. The thread gets thinner. That is the mechanism of empathic exhaustion, not one dramatic event. 1,000 small dissolutions, one social interaction at a time, until one day you look in the mirror and feel like you are looking at a very good actor playing a role you never auditioned for. Jung went further than this, and here is where he gets controversial. He said that an empath who has not differentiated from the collective, who does not have a clear and stable sense of where they end and the world begins, is not actually showing empathy at all. They are showing what he called mystic identity. They are fused with others, and fusion, Jung said, is not the same as connection. Real connection requires two separate people. If you have dissolved into everyone around you, there is only one person in the relationship, and it is not you. That statement is uncomfortable. I know it is uncomfortable, but sit with it for a second, because it is also, if you have been nodding along to everything so far, probably the most honest thing anyone has said to you about your empathy in a very long time. So the first thing to pay attention to is your own persona. When you walk into a room, ask yourself honestly, am I bringing myself with me? Or am I immediately reading the room and becoming what it needs? Because every time you abandon your own center to match someone else's frequency, you are practicing dissolution. You are training your psyche to disappear. And a psyche that keeps disappearing will eventually start screaming to be found. That screaming sounds like exhaustion. It sounds like the kind of tired that does not go away no matter how much you sleep. It sounds like crying in the car on the way home without knowing why. It sounds like the hollow feeling of having been deeply involved with other people's lives all day and coming home to a self you do not recognize. Now here is where it gets really uncomfortable, because the second thing Jung said empaths must pay attention to is the one that most people, when they first hear it, reject completely. The second thing is the shadow. Jung defined the shadow as the dark half of the personality. Every single one of us has one. The shadow is made of the feelings, impulses, desires, and traits that we have decided are not acceptable, too selfish, too angry, too needy, too ugly to be part of who we tell ourselves we are. So we push these parts of ourselves down into the unconscious. We pretend they do not exist. We build our whole identity around being the opposite of those things. And the darker and more rejected the shadow, the more it controls us from underground. Here is the part that applies directly to empaths. Jung observed that highly sensitive people who build their entire identity around being caring, selfless, and emotionally available are particularly skilled at denying their own shadow. Because an empath who admits to feeling angry or selfish or bone-tired of giving to people who never give back has to reckon with the fact that those feelings are in conflict with the identity they have built. So the feelings get pushed down. They get stuffed into the shadow, and the shadow grows. But here is what happens next, and this is where Jung's thinking becomes genuinely revolutionary. When you have not integrated your shadow, when you have not made peace with the parts of yourself you do not want to claim, those rejected parts do not disappear. They find a way out. And the way they find is called projection. Projection is the process by which we unconsciously displace our own unacknowledged feelings onto other people. The anger you will not let yourself feel becomes the anger you see and absorb everywhere around you. The neediness you have shamed yourself for having becomes the neediness you attract over and over in the people you form relationships with. The exhaustion you will not admit to becomes the emotional heaviness you pick up from every tired person in your orbit. But there is something more specific happening here that most people miss. Jung noted that projection does not work randomly. The other person has to provide what he called a hook, some small, real quality in them that your unconscious can latch onto and inflate. An empath with an unacknowledged rage, for example, does not project onto people who are genuinely calm. They are drawn specifically to people who carry just enough suppressed anger to give the projection somewhere to land. This is why certain emotional dynamics feel inexplicably magnetic. It is not bad luck. It is your own unintegrated shadow finding its mirror in the outside world. Consider a narrative illustration based on a composite of patterns documented in psychological literature. Picture a deeply empathic individual who has spent years being the steady one, the reliable one, the one who never breaks down. This person has built their entire self-image around being a source of strength for others. But underneath that image is a reservoir of resentment they have never spoken aloud, real and legitimate resentment at how rarely anyone shows up for them the way they show up for everyone else. That resentment is their shadow. They have decided it is not allowed, because someone who truly cares about others is not supposed to feel resentful. So the resentment lives in the dark, and this person without knowing why, begins to feel other people's resentment almost physically. They walk into a room where someone is quietly bitter, and they absorb that bitterness like it was waiting for them. They carry it home. They cannot figure out where it came from. It was theirs all along. This is the central insight Jung had about empathic suffering that the modern self-help world has completely missed. You may be absorbing the shadows of others because you have not yet integrated your own. The emotions you feel most intensely in other people are often the emotions you are least willing to acknowledge in yourself. And until you look at your own shadow honestly, you will keep reaching into the emotional world of the people around you, trying to process something that was never really theirs to begin with. Integrating your shadow does not mean becoming someone who acts on every dark impulse. It means having an honest conversation with the parts of yourself you have been pretending do not exist. It means sitting with the anger and saying, "Yes, that is mine." It means admitting to the need and saying, "Yes, I want to be taken care of sometimes too." It means claiming the whole of your inner world, light and dark, instead of just the parts that look good in public. And the strange thing, the deeply counterintuitive thing, is that when you do this, when you finally acknowledge your own shadow honestly, you do not become more absorbed in other people's emotions. You become less absorbed, because you no longer need to borrow their feelings to express what you will not let yourself feel directly. Your inner world becomes yours again, and the emotional noise from the outside world gets much, much quieter. But here is something Jung pointed out that almost nobody talks about. The empath who has denied their shadow the longest is often the one who appears the most loving, the most generous, the most spiritually evolved in their friend group. They talk about compassion constantly. They post about kindness. They are the first to show up when someone is hurting. And all of that is real. But underneath it, because they have spent so much energy maintaining the image of total selflessness, there is a buried self that is furious, exhausted, and quietly convinced that nobody would love them if they ever stopped giving. The shadow does not disappear just because the persona shines brightly. It just goes deeper. And the deeper it goes, the more power it has over your behavior in ways you cannot see or control. Jung would call this inflation of the persona. When you pour so much energy into the good, the kind, the giving version of yourself, the shadow inflates in proportion. The rejected feelings grow heavy with all the pressure of denial, and empaths who have the most beautiful and caring personas sometimes have the heaviest shadows of all. That is not a criticism. It is an observation about how the psyche balances itself. You cannot put all of your weight on one side of a scale forever. Eventually something tips. The shadow is the second thing to pay attention to, your own dark half. The part of you that is currently running your life from underground while you look the other way. Now we have covered what is draining you. We have named the merging, the lost persona, the unintegrated shadow, and at this point you might be in the middle of a small internal storm. That is fine. That is exactly right. Because here is the question that changes everything. What is the actual solution? Not the intellectual understanding. The real, practical, lived-in path that transforms all of this from a burden into something else entirely. That is the third thing. Jung called it individuation. He also called it, in his early writings, the transcendent function. These are two related but distinct ideas. The transcendent function is the specific psychological bridge that connects the conscious and the unconscious. Think of it as the internal mediator. When a storm of emotion comes in from the outside world, from a grieving friend, a tense family dinner, a workplace full of anxious people, the transcendent function is what allows you to receive that emotional reality at the conscious level without being swallowed by what lives below it in the unconscious. It is the crossing point, And it is precisely this bridge that most empaths have never been taught to build. Without it, every emotional wave from the outside goes straight through the ego and into the unconscious, where it pools with everything else you have not yet processed. Individuation is the longer journey. The transcendent function is the daily tool that makes the journey possible. Individuation is the process of becoming who you actually are. Not who your family needed you to be, not who your partner expects you to be, not who the room is quietly asking you to be in any given moment, but who you fundamentally, irreducibly, completely are. Jung believed that every human being has a self, and he was very precise about what the self is and what it is not. The ego is the center of your conscious mind. It is the part of you that thinks, decides, remembers, and plans. The self, by contrast, is the center of the entire psyche, both the conscious and the unconscious together. The ego is a small circle inside a much larger one. Individuation is the process by which the ego gradually comes to recognize and align with that larger circle. It is the ego's long, often uncomfortable journey toward the self. And for empaths, this is not a side project. It is the entire answer to the question of why everything hurts so much. Jung wrote that individuation means cutting a new path through hitherto untrodden territory, which is a dramatic way of saying becoming yourself requires going somewhere nobody has shown you how to go, because yourself is specific to you. Nobody else has the same one, and the world will not automatically make space for it. You have to make the space yourself. For empaths, individuation is the specific cure for empathic burnout, because when you are truly individuated, when you have a strong, clear center, you can enter another person's emotional experience without losing your own. You can feel their pain without becoming it. This is what Jung called a wider consciousness. Not a consciousness that feels less, one that has more room for your own experience and someone else's at the same time, without the two collapsing into each other. Let us look at what this actually looks like as a practice, because theory without practice is just interesting words that solve nothing. Consider a composite example based on patterns observed across personal development and clinical psychology work. Picture a deeply empathic person who has started doing this work. They walk into the same situations they always have: a conversation with someone in pain, a family dinner with unspoken tension, a workplace full of stress. But something is different. Before the emotional field of the room pulls them under, there is a moment, just a fraction of a second, where they notice themselves, where they check in, where they ask, is this feeling mine, or is it theirs? That pause is small. It does not look dramatic from the outside, but it is the entire difference between merging and connecting, between losing yourself and showing up, between empathic burnout and empathic strength. The practice of individuation for an empath looks like this. Before you give your attention to anyone else's storm, you find your own center first, not in a cold or selfish way, in the same way a swimmer finds their footing before they dive in to help someone who is struggling. You would not help a drowning person by jumping in without knowing how to swim yourself. You would help by being stable enough to reach for them without being pulled under. That is exactly what a differentiated self allows you to do in emotional situations. You reach in. You do not fall in. And this is where Jung completely turns the popular idea of empathy on its head. We have been taught that the more you give of yourself, the more empathic you are. Jung looked at that idea and said, that is not love. That is dependency dressed up as virtue. Real empathy requires you to be present as a fully formed self. You cannot truly see another person when you are merged with them. You can only feel them, and feeling someone is not the same as helping them. Sometimes, the most loving thing in the world is a clearly drawn line, a calm no, a moment where the other person can see that you have your own inner world. because that reality shows them that theirs can matter too. Jung also pointed out something practical and easy to miss. The people around an empath who has not done this work are not being well served by the constant giving. They are being orbited by someone who reflects their feelings back to them so completely that they never have to confront those feelings themselves. The empath becomes a mirror, and the only way out is for the empath to stop being a mirror and start being a person. But Jung did not stop at describing the benefits of individuation. He described the cost of avoiding it. And the cost is serious. Jung called it loss of soul, not metaphorically. He meant it as a real psychological event, and he was specific about its cause. Loss of soul happens when the individual lives so completely for the outer world, for others, for the persona, for the role of caretaker, that the inner world, the soul, the self, is starved of attention until it becomes a desert. It is not that the person is damaged. It is that they have made a catastrophic investment error. They have poured every resource they have into the outer, into giving and adjusting and absorbing, and they have left the inner completely unwatered. And an inner world that receives no investment does not just shrink, it goes silent. That silence is what eventually shows up as the loss of creativity, the fading of meaning, and the inability to feel genuine personal joy. Not the joy of helping, not the satisfaction of being useful. Simple, personal, uncomplicated joy that belongs only to you. That disappears first, and most empaths have been so busy attending to the outer world that they did not notice when it left. This is the danger that empaths face at its most extreme. And it does not happen all at once, which is why it is so hard to catch. It happens the way the tide goes out. You do not notice any single moment when it was gone. You just look up one day and realize the water is very far away, and you have no idea when it left. What makes this especially cruel is that the world around you rewards the behavior that causes it. Society does not tell you that you are dissolving. Society tells you that you are wonderful. Society says, you are so giving, so selfless, so tuned into other people. Everyone around you benefits from your dissolution, so nobody is in a hurry to flag it as a problem. The more you disappear into your role as the caring one, the more people praise you for it. And the praise feels good for a while. The praise fills the hole that used to be your identity, until eventually, even the praise stops working. Until eventually you are running a deficit so large that no amount of external validation can cover it, and that is when the hollow feeling sets in. That is loss of soul in slow motion. If something in that description feels familiar, if you have been noticing that you do not really know what you enjoy anymore, that you do not know what you want when nobody else's needs are pressing on you, then I want you to hear this clearly. That feeling is not a sign that you are too broken to fix. It is a sign that yourself has been waiting for you. All of those signals, the exhaustion, the numbness, the quiet desperation in the in-between moments, are the same message from the same place. Come back to yourself. Jung was direct about the stakes. He said that an empath's greatest responsibility is not to the people who need them, it is to their own self. That is a controversial statement in a culture that celebrates self-sacrifice and treats emotional overgiving as a virtue. But Jung was not interested in what culture celebrates. He was interested in what actually works. And what actually works is this: when you invest in your own individuation, when you do the difficult, uncomfortable, deeply personal work of knowing yourself, integrating your shadow, and distinguishing your persona from your true identity, you become genuinely capable of helping others in a way you never could before. Not because you feel less, but because you have a stable place to feel from. Without that foundation, everything you give is given from depletion, and what you give from depletion does not actually help the way you think it does. It looks like helping. It might even feel like helping in the moment. But there is something hollow about support that comes from a person who has nothing left. The person receiving it can usually feel that something is off, even if they cannot name it, even if they are too grateful to say so. When you give from a full center, when you show up as a whole person with your own clear identity and your own integrated shadow and your own strong sense of where you end and the world begins, the support you offer is completely different. It is real. It is grounded. It lands differently because it comes from someone who is actually there, not someone who has quietly dissolved into the role of helper. Jung described the fully individuated person who has done this work using an image I find very striking. He described a person who can participate in the world without being swallowed by it. Someone who enters the emotional field of others the way a skilled sailor enters rough water, with skill, with awareness, and with a boat under them. Not a hero who does not feel the waves, a person who has learned to navigate them without drowning. That is what your empathy was always meant to be, not a door you walk through so completely that you cannot find your way back. A window, one you can look through, reach through, and step back from. One that lets the world in without letting you out. So let us name these three things one final time. The first is the persona, the functional complex that should be a mask you put on and take off, not an identity your ego has fused with permanently. Knowing where your persona ends and your self begins is the foundation of everything else. The second is the shadow, the dark half you have been projecting outward because you will not claim it inward. Making peace with it does not make you darker, it makes you freer. The third is individuation, the lifelong journey of the ego toward the whole self. Not a performance, not a mirror, a person with your own center and your own clear sense of where you stand. Jung spent his entire career watching people navigate this process. He watched people begin it late in life and change completely. He watched people resist it for decades and pay the price. And the ones who looked honestly at their persona, their shadow, and their own capacity for individuation were the ones who transformed what had been draining them into the most powerful thing in their lives. Not overnight. Day by day, one honest self-inquiry at a time. He was also precise about the destination. He said the goal of individuation is not to become untouchable or to stop caring. The goal is to become so fully yourself that you can participate in the world without being swallowed by it. Actually go in, actually feel it, actually be moved, but come back, always come back to yourself. That is the version of empathy Jung believed was possible, sustainable, not requiring you to keep giving until there is nothing left. It requires you to know yourself well enough that giving does not hollow you out, a center strong enough that connecting does not mean losing your coordinates. The people who drain you the most right now are not the proof that your empathy is too much. They are the proof that yourself has not yet been fully claimed. When you do this work, those same dynamics shift, not because the other people change, because you do. You bring yourself into the room, your shadow known, your persona understood, and people feel that difference even when they cannot name it. It was never too much sensitivity. It was too little self. And the self is not something you build from scratch. It has been there all along, waiting under the persona and the projection and the participation mystique, waiting for you to stop performing long enough to notice it. The fact that you watched this video today means the process has already started for you. That is not a small thing. Most people never get this far. Most people feel the exhaustion, shrug, and tell themselves they are just very sensitive. You did not do that. You kept asking why. That is the beginning of individuation right there. That restless, honest question. Why am I like this? And what do I do about it? That question is yourself knocking. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.